series called Being Salty in a Sugar-Coated World. And as you've been hearing, we've been talking about things that aren't very comfortable. And Christianity isn't very comfortable. It's not supposed to be. It's countercultural. It's against the stream. It's against everything that the world tells us to do. And so if it is comfortable, you are doing everything wrong. It's not supposed to be like that. First week we talked about a sugar-coated spirituality. A spirituality that makes me feel good. But it's not the gospel. The gospel talked about carrying the cross, going down the narrow path. It wasn't a message of feel good. The week after that we talked about salty love and being able to love people when it's hard. Sometimes it is hard to love difficult people. And we talked about how it is our calling through the gospel to love even difficult people. Last week we spoke about something that I want to make some clarification on. We spoke about transformation in prayer. That when we pray, often we are trying to change God. We're trying to change God and His will to be kind of what fits our perfect will. And a lot of people were shaken by that and say, okay, so should I never pray? And I want to make a little bit of a clarification. There's two stages in your prayers. There is the stage of formation, and then there's the stage of transformation. What's the difference? When you're young, you think about like your parents want to show you how much they love you. They get you gifts. You say, Daddy, I want that toy. And Daddy goes and buys the toy, and he just gives it to you. And he's trying to show the child that he loves him, or that he is generous, and that I care about you, and I care about your joy and your happiness. But as the child gets older, the kid says, hey, Dad, I want a new car. And the dad says, okay, I want you to get a job. And they say, but Dad, come on, you can afford it. Just fork out the money and just get me a new car. I know I can afford it, but I'm trying to form you. And so what I want to clarify from last week is, though God wants to transform us in prayer, there is a season in your life when you are praying that God is also trying to form you. So pray and ask for the things on your heart. And God, in His wisdom as a loving Father, knowing the stage that you're at, He wants to reveal things about His character, that I am loving. And that I do care about the small details in your life. You might be praying for things that God is going to grant you because He's trying to form your understanding that He is a loving, generous, giving, compassionate God. But He's a wise God. And so as you mature, He starts saying, sorry, I can't give that to you because I need something deeper in your life to take place. And so I just want to clarify that from last week. And this week, today's talk is called Preserve One Another. We're going to talk about salty confrontation. We talked about salty love and loving difficult people. Well, sometimes we have to do something that is difficult and not so easy. And a lot of people don't have the type of personalities that are confrontational. A lot of us don't have the personality that can just stand up in front of somebody and tell them what they're doing is wrong. We're not confrontational. And that's what we're going to talk about, God willing, this morning. If we can click the next one. Colossians 4:6 says this. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Once again, the Bible bringing us back to salt. Saying, let your speech always be with grace. Be kind. Be gentle with people. Be gracious with people. But season it with a little bit of salt. It should be, but always. It shouldn't just be always, but always. Because a lot of us do the first part. When we speak to people, we don't want to upset them. I mean, there's some personalities that are, they're train wrecks. Like they have to go right through anybody and they're all salt. But St. Paul says, let your speech always be with grace. Keyword, always. But, in my opinion, it should say, but seasoned with salt. St. John Chrysostom says this saying, I'm going to read it to you, and if you don't understand, I'll clarify. It says, let your speech be always with grace and seasoned with salt. That is, that this graciousness may not lapse into indifferentism. What does that mean? That when you are so gracious you don't become indifferent, meaning you become passive about people's mistakes. Don't be so gracious that it leads you to become indifferent about people's mistakes and the wrongdoings of people in your life that you love. So he says, be careful. Let your speech be always with grace and seasoned with salt. That is, that this graciousness may not lapse into indifferentism, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. How many of us like getting on a weight scale, right? How many of us like to weigh themselves? Of course, there is a certain gender that when she gets on this scale, she will make sure that she has gone to the bathroom, she hasn't eaten anything, she's not wearing any clothes, so that when she goes, it is the most accurate number on that scale. Nobody likes to get on a scale. Nobody likes to get on this scale and see the real number of their weight and say, I need to lose some pounds. Nobody wants to know the truth about themselves. Well, real, authentic relationships are the place to get on the scale. Real, authentic friendships and relationships are exactly where you get on the scale and you see the truth. Every one of us needs a few people to tell us the truth about our hearts and souls. Everybody has a weak spot, a blind spot that they can't see within themselves. We need someone to remind us of your deepest values. I think sometimes as we go through life, sometimes we actually forget our values. You forget that you have deep biblical Christian values deep down inside of you. And we forget those values. And we need somebody to remind us of those values. We need someone to help us question our motives and examine our consciences. I was speaking to somebody recently. We were having a wonderful discussion. It was about even in service. Some people can serve their hearts out. And they can give to the poor. And they can come and visit people and ask about people, which is the best thing in the world. But sometimes you need somebody in your life to tell you why you're doing what you're doing. It's all about you. Has nothing to do with God. Has nothing to do with you love these people and you have this big heart. Sometimes you need somebody to check you and say, wait a second, you were doing this for yourself. We need truth tellers. We need truth tellers because our capacity to live in denial is astonishing. Self-deception is a process where we pull the cover over our own eyes. Self-deception is a process where we pull the cover over our own eyes. A lot of us like to be deceived. We don't want those truth tellers in our life. People that are going to tell you like it is, and most of them call them honey. We call them our spouses. Maybe for you people that are married, a lot of your spouses are those truth tellers. They tell you like you need to hear it. Maybe it's your roommate, right? The person in college, you might have a roommate that sees really what you do every day in your room versus what you present yourself to be to the whole world. There's a whole field in social psychology, and it's the study of what is called cognitive dissonance. And it's based on our nearly endless ability to justify what we do or say that is consistent with our self-concept. You can convince yourself that everything you do is right. And you can justify everything. The reason why I said what I said is because of the reason why I did what I did. There's always a very good reason why I say what I say and what I do what I do. What psychologists call this is called cognitive dissonance. Many of us have never invited someone to be a truth teller in your life. Do you have somebody in your life that can give you the brutal, honest truth? Where you can come and say, all right, just say it like it is. You know, there's some people that you want to tell them, but you're afraid that it's going to offend them. And a lot of people don't want to hear it. And so we just kind of skip around each other's, like, oh, you look great. No, you don't. You don't look great. It's written all over your face. You're a mess. It looks like you're going through maybe depression. You're not taking care of yourself. But because a lot of us are not truth tellers, we skip around these things. Who have you invited in your life to be a truth teller? You say, lay it on thick. Just tell me the real truth. There was a time where I said this one time. I actually mentioned this in a sermon a few years ago, and I had a bunch of people come to my office. All right, Buna, just lay it there. I'm like, now I just insulted the whole church. Everybody came to my office, and I had to tell everybody really the truth about themselves. It's important. It's important that we understand ourselves deeply. What if the truth about me is too painful for me to bear? What if the truth about yourself is too painful for you to bear? You ever have somebody tell you the truth and it's like a knife in your heart? They just knocked you down in one sentence. Because a lot of us, again, we have this cognitive dissonance where we have convinced ourselves that everything we do is right. There's nothing worse than when somebody comes and says, by the way, everybody sees this about you. It's so painful that you're the only one that doesn't see. You're the only one that can't see the truth about yourself. It is so painful. There's the famous scene in a movie where you see Jack Nicholson telling Tom Cruise, he says, well, give me the truth. He says, what? You can't handle the truth. You can't handle the truth. You know why? People nowadays are ultra sensitive. I don't know what it is about our specific culture. Can you nod your head if you agree that our specific culture is a little bit sensitive? People hold grudges for years because somebody told them the truth. And this is a painful thing. What does Jesus tell us? In John chapter 8, it says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Isn't that a beautiful verse? Isn't that a powerful verse? That the Lord is saying, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. I want to read another verse in Romans. It's not on the slides, but I want you to listen to this. Romans 15:14, it says this. Now I myself, St. Paul speaking to the Romans, am confident concerning you, my brethren, that you also are full of goodness. You are good people. I know that. I'm confident about that. Filled with all knowledge, able also to admonish one another. The word admonish means to correct, to speak straightforward. Romans 15:14. I know that you are very good, but I also know that you are able to admonish one another. Feels salty, right? Feels uncomfortable. Because of sensitivity and being vain, we reject the serious words of another Christian. And if you are rejecting the serious words of another person in your life, chances are you are not able to give those same words to anyone else. You are not able to be a good friend to someone else because you yourself are skipping around the truth. Because you can't handle it yourself. The reason why you're skipping around the truth in the people in your life is because you hate hearing it yourself. Self-awareness. I know it's salty. It doesn't feel good. It's a little bit painful and it's a little bit bitter, but it is the gospel. This is the word of God. We need truth tellers. Next slide. We need truth tellers who will help us grow in our acceptance of reality. We need truth tellers who will help us grow in our acceptance of reality. We also need people to help us keep accountable to the commitments that we make. A lot of us, we make commitments to God. How many of you have made some commitment in your life to God? You say, all right, Lord, from now on, this time I'm going to pray. This time I'm going to start giving my tithe. I'm going to start being honest about this. I'm going to end this friendship that is dragging me downhill. I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. And we make these commitments, but who's holding you accountable to those? Anybody ever ask you about your commitments to prayer? Who knows what your commitment to prayer is? That they can say, hey, did you pray today? Did you pray last night? Did you spend some time with the Lord? You're becoming maybe a nasty person or a nasty friend. You are becoming annoying. You're difficult. You're fighting with everyone around you, maybe with your spouse, whoever it may be. Who's going to actually say the reason why you are the way you are is because you've avoided your responsibilities before God? When was the last time you closed the door to your room and lifted up your heart? Maybe it's been years. How about reading the Word of God? Who is keeping you accountable? What are my commitments about giving? Hey, honey, I know you got your bonus this week. How much are we going to give to the poor for Christmas? How much are we going to give to the church? You know, sweetheart, like a bonus is different than salary and the time. Like, come on, like, right? We don't want anyone to keep us accountable. Be careful. We need someone who's going to keep on asking us, to remind us, do some things need to change in my life? What are you struggling with in regards to temptation? How nice is it that it's beautiful when spouses can tell each other, I've been dealing with temptation a lot, I need your prayers. And maybe the spouse can give us some guidance. Maybe your friend can say, you know why you're struggling with temptation? It's because the people you're hanging around with. You need to hear it. And you need to hear it thick. You need to hear it on heavy. You need to hear it the way it is and stop avoiding what needs to change in my life. What's amazing, you guys ever see these famous athletes, somebody like LeBron James? You know, they have all these videos online of like LeBron James training, and LeBron James has a coach. I always wonder, like, what is the coach going to add value to LeBron James? Like Michael Jordan had a coach. Who is Michael Jordan how to play basketball? Right? Who's going to tell Michael Jordan, hey, your dribble's a little off. Your form needs to be a little bit smoother. But even the greatest of stars and athletes have a coach. And they hold them accountable to what they're not doing. I sitting there coaching the greatest athletes in the world, telling them how to play basketball. I don't get it. They're truth tellers. They're truth tellers. Hey, the three-point shot, that's not your shot. Don't shoot that. Scoot in a little bit. Truth tellers. We need people, if we do this in sports, how much when it comes to our salvation? Imagine athletes are doing it and how to shoot a basketball. What about when it comes to our salvation? Who is going to give me the truth? Alcoholics Anonymous, people who are addicted to alcohol. These groups are made up of people who have faced up to the fact that they're not normal. One another. You are held accountable. The way people get set free from addictive behavior, whether alcohol, drugs, pornography, whatever it may be, it's only by accountability. It is one of the most important steps in this being set free, is that somebody is telling you no. Somebody is giving you the hard truth. I know it's salty. Who is telling you you are wrong? I want you to imagine if a priest were to invite you to confession and were to ask you these questions before confession. Do you desire to be told all of your faults, plain and clear? Do you desire that I should tell you whatsoever I think, whatsoever I fear, whatsoever I hear concerning you? How many of us would love for Abuna to say, look, tell me, I'm going to tell you exactly what I feel about everything that you're saying. We don't want to hear it. Do you desire that I help you search your heart and why you do what you do? Would you be comfortable with that conversation? You say, look, I just come to give you my list, read me the prayer, and you go your way and I go my way and let's do our thing. But that's because we avoid this concept of hearing the truth. When our relationships shift the focus from being accountable to one another to vague sharing. What does that mean? When you get together, we talk about nonsense. When was the last time you got together with a group of friends and we actually were honest with each other? We talk about sports and we talk about all the drama that's going on at church, and we can talk about anything, just vague sharing. But how many times in our relationships do we shift our focus from real accountability? You know, as soon as you start talking to me about what I'm going wrong is, well, you know what's wrong with you? How many of us ever thank our friends, say, you know, thank you for telling me that. I never knew this about myself. But what we do is, you know what you said about me? Let me tell you what you need to hear about yourself. And we begin to stick it. Why? We hate it. But not just you. Some of the most famous men in the Old Testament made horrible choices and knew deep failure. And we're going to talk about David this morning. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, it says, "It happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about the woman. And someone said, 'Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?' Then David sent messengers and took her. And she came to him, and she returned to her house. And the woman or prospered. And David house, and a gift of food from the king followed him." Imagine, David sent someone to find out about her, and in doing so, he actually received a very light confrontation. Listen to the statement. I read it earlier. It said this: "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam?" She's somebody's daughter. "The wife of Uriah?" Hey, David, you know that really pretty lady that you're talking to? Isn't she the wife of Uriah? Isn't she the daughter of that guy? It was a light, mild confrontation saying, hey, wake up. What did he do? He sent for the woman and he took her for himself. You see, in ancient times, genealogies, or basically like somebody's like order of history, like the son of and the son of and the son of, this person is the son of, okay? They were not usually recorded for women. So for the person to say, you know, this genealogy, she happens to be the daughter of, they never say it for women. But in this time, the person mildly confronted David. You see, if David were spiritually sensitive, this statement would have stopped him right in his tracks. But David wasn't interested in hearing the truth. He didn't want to hear it. David, you just heard what the guy said. You just heard what the guy said. Listen. Just ignored it completely. Because David thinks he's in control. How long does David live in this hypocrisy and hiddenness? Do you guys know? We don't know exactly, but we know that nobody knew what happened, at least for the full time of the pregnancy of Bathsheba. David stood in hiddenness and darkness all by himself without revealing to anybody. We know later on that David got Uriah, the husband of Bathsheba, killed in war. He sent him out to be the front lines and he was murdered. And so now sin is bringing sin. Be careful. You see, every day David gets a little bit more deception. Every day his heart gets a little harder. God gets a little further away. Anytime we try to handle temptation in isolation, we are extremely vulnerable to deception. If you turn to your handouts, anytime we try to handle temptation in isolation, we are extremely vulnerable to deception. You see, David's been playing God with people's lives. Bathsheba, Uriah, Joab, the army, all of Israel. David is playing God, and nobody's going to tell him. I read this neat story by a man named Gary Richmond. I'm going to read you the story. Listen to it. It says, Richmond used to work at a zoo that had a 13-foot long king cobra snake. Its venom glands contained enough poison to kill 1,000 adults. The cobra had a scar that made him look like the embodiment of evil, but worse, it meant that when the snake shed his skin, the eye cap did not come off. It had to be removed by hand. And unfortunately, snakes don't have hands. This required a team of 5 people, 2 zookeepers, the zoo's curator, a veterinarian, like an animal doctor, and Gary himself, whose job was to furnish the scalpel, the eye, and the gift and sponge to the vet. The cobra slithered from its den, spread its cape, raised itself up to full stature, and looked at the 5 intruders, deciding on its first victim. He chose the curator. With lightning speed, the keepers threw their nets around the writhing snake. The curator grasped it behind the venom glands, and the vet said, "Let's get this over." So basically, they've captured the snake, they put it in a bag, and they're trying to get this thing, as the snake has shed its skin, that's stuck on its eye. It needs human hands to come and remove it. But this snake has the venom that can kill 1,000 men. His hands were trembling. Beads of sweat were dripping off everyone's forehead but the snake's. The vet asked if Gary had any cuts on his hands. He said no. He told Gary to get up a paper towels and stuff them in the cobra's mouth. Okay. The cobra bit and chewed until the towels were yellow and dripping with venom. As the team worked, the curator explained that every year, several full-grown elephants die from king cobra bites. A man could never survive a bite with a full load of venom. This is why he was having Gary drain the snake's venom sacs. The curator's hands were sweating and his muscles were weakening. His fingers were starting to cramp, which could not have been good news to anyone except maybe the snake. The curator wasn't sure they could move quickly enough when it was time for the release. Then he explained what we might call the secret of the snake. More people are bitten trying to let go of snakes than when they grab them. You see, the sins and bad habits in our lives are what destroy our souls. Our sins and our bad habits. And exactly like the snake, in order to control this snake, it took how many people? It took 5. It took 5 men to be able to make sure to handle the snake. It's a very dangerous thing to handle the snake on our own. Are you handling some temptation or sin in your life by yourself? Is there anybody that you can be honest with and say, I'm struggling and I'm in a trap? You see, the devil wants you to be in this little dark corner where every day you're playing with the snake and nobody knows about what's going on in your life. Nobody knows that you are trapped. Maybe it's an addiction. Sometimes I might have to sit with people in confession and say, you need to tell your parents. I can't tell your parents. You need to tell them. Because this habit, this addiction, you're never going to be set free unless you tell somebody. You could go 10 years never shaking off this bad sin. You're trying to handle the snake by yourself and it doesn't work. You need help. Listen to St. Moses the strong and St. Isidore the priest. St. Moses one day was in his cell praying, and the devil appeared in the shape of a woman. And she was trying to tempt him to fall in the sin of fornication. And St. Moses was fighting the temptation. He ran to his spiritual father. He says, Father, I sinned and I'm dealing with the battle of thoughts. He says, okay, go back and I'll pray for you. St. Moses goes back. The woman appears again. So he runs back to his father confession. And he says, it happened again. He says, okay, go back and I'll pray for you. He goes back 11 times to his spiritual father in one night. You see, look at the wisdom of these saints. They know that I cannot handle this alone. On the 11th time, he told St. Isidore, his spiritual father, how am I going to overcome this temptation? I can't do it anymore. He took him up to the roof of his cell, and he says, I want you to look into the valley. What do you see? He says, I see thousands of demons fighting against my soul. And he says, okay, now I want you to look to this side of the valley. What do you see? He says, I find tens of thousands of angels also fighting for my soul. He needed that encouragement. He needed that encouragement. He needed another person to be there to help him fight this temptation. And he went back and he overcame the temptation. Are you honest and open about the snake in your life that is very venomous, has a lot of poison, and that could bring you to your death? Look what Eve did. Eve kept her temptation to herself, and so did David. David grabbed the snake on his own. So this time, the Bible in the story of David, it says, and David sent for Joab, and then he sent for Uriah, and then he sent for Bathsheba. He keeps on sending for people to bring them to him. Well, God decides he's going to send somebody this time. Let's listen to what God did in the story. He sends David a prophet named Nathan. Nathan's going to tell the truth. Nathan's going to hold David accountable to live up to all the Psalms that he writes. 2 Samuel chapter 12 says this, Then the Lord sent Nathan to David. And he came to him and he said to him, There were 2 men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceedingly many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb, which he had bought and nourished, and it grew up together with him and with his children. It ate of his own food and drank from his own cup and lay in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich man, who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd to prepare one for the wayfaring men who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. So David's anger was greatly aroused against the man, and he said to Nathan, As the Lord lives, the man who has done this shall surely die, and he shall restore fourfold for the lamb, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, You are the man. Nathan said to David, You are the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. For a moment, I want you to think about what must have been going on in Nathan's heart. David is the most powerful man in the whole world. David is going a little crazy. He's stealing people's wives. He's killing their husbands. David has lost it a little bit. So imagine what's going in Nathan's mind. Maybe there's somebody that's closer to David that can tell him this. Maybe it doesn't have to be me. Maybe I can tell him, Hey, David, you're such a great king. Maybe you spend some more time in the fields writing some psalms. What did Nathan do? Let's look at how bold he was. This wasn't a casual conversation. There's no guarantee that David is going to be responsive to what Nathan's going to tell him. Maybe it would be awkward to bring this whole subject up. You know, I'm going to make him feel uncomfortable. I'm going to feel uncomfortable. Let's just avoid the whole thing. Or maybe to say, I'm not any better than David. I have my own temptations. Let just David do his thing. He worries about his stuff. I worry about my stuff, and we'll be fine. Don't we have this mentality? Don't we honestly have this mentality where we kind of avoid and we skip around? You see, there's a kind of person who speaks. Some people, they speak the truth like for fun, right? They want to stick it to me. Hey, do you know what you're doing is wrong? And I want everybody to know you're the worst person in the church. Some people do it recreationally, like it's fun for them. Everybody thinks that they are the prophet. But look at what St. Paul tells us in Ephesians 4:29. I love this verse. It says, Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, for building, that it may impart grace to the hearers. I read a nice saying by St. Jerome. Listen to this. It says, A good word is one that serves to build upon the occasion, communicating grace to the hearers, because it teaches them to pursue virtues and run away from evils. Whenever we say what is not in season, so it's at the wrong time, rather drives them headlong into disaster. So I need wisdom. Because I can give somebody something at the wrong time when they're not ready, and I can drive them into disaster. Whenever we say what is not in season, or inappropriate for the context, or that which doesn't contribute to the good of the hearers, an evil word proceeds from our mouth. You know what he's saying? If you are rebuking somebody and you're trying to tell them what they're doing wrong, just for the sake of telling them that they're wrong, and it's coming out of a bad intention to prove that the other person is wrong, St. Jerome is saying that is an evil word coming out of your mouth. You might think you're doing something right, but if your goal is to tear them down, it's important that what burns deeply in the heart of a true prophet is not just anger, but love. You want to hold somebody accountable, do it out of love. Test your own intentions. Before you go and speak directly to a person, say, why do I want to correct this person? Is it going to make me feel better? Is it going to make me prove I was right all the time and you are wrong? Be careful. You see, to hold others accountable doesn't mean that we get to view ourselves as being in charge of their lives, but accountability, next slide, is a tool and a gift we give to one another to try to realize the growth we could never know all by ourselves. Do you understand that? Accountability is a tool and a gift we give to one another. It is a tool and a gift we give to one another to try to realize the growth we could never know by ourselves. Nathan looks straight in the eye of the most powerful man in the world, a man who could have him put to death in seconds. And he tells him, "You are the man." So if truth-telling is so important, why don't we do it? It's fear. Let's be honest, we are afraid. Listen to what Solomon the Wise says in Proverbs chapter 27. It says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend." Pay attention to this verse. "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." Faithful are the wounds of a friend. A friend that might hurt you because they're telling you the truth, they're faithful. If people are just giving you kisses and telling you how great your life is and how wonderful a person you are, they're your enemy. They don't want to see you change. They are just being sugar-coated friends. They aren't doing what is salty and what is for preserving you. And the topic of this talk is called preserve one another. Preserve them from the spread of decay. It takes so much courage, I know. If we speak a painful truth to someone, chances are it could get messy. You can get accused of getting into somebody's business when you didn't ask them to be involved. The person themselves is going to have decay building up in their life. We live in what is called a pseudo relationship. What does pseudo mean? It means artificial. It's a fake relationship. You might be in a pseudo relationship because you are avoiding conflict. In pseudo community or in pseudo relationships, we speak in generalities. We speak in general. We say things that those around us will agree with. We say things that people want to hear. Conversations are filtered to make sure that no one gets hurt. Does that sound like you? By the way, that's 2 of 4 personality types are like that. They're not confrontational. You might have the personality type that just doesn't know how to do it. You need to pray for grace, because if you give grace not seasoned with salt, you could still allow somebody to go down a destructive path. They are playing with a snake and you are quiet. Be careful of staying quiet and avoiding conflict. This is why some marriages and relationships don't work out. They haven't told the truth in years about how lonely they are. Hurt or anger. I had never understood when somebody's been married for 40 years and they say, "We're getting a divorce." I'm like, you've been married with each other for 40 years? I'm not even 40 years old. Like, how is it after 40 years now you decide we can't? Because they stayed quiet. They stayed quiet about the other person wouldn't be willing to tell. It's hard. Relationships. We have to be willing to enter into chaos. What is chaos? It happens when someone is willing to speak risky truth. It's not easy. Look at Jesus, what he did. He told the Samaritan woman, "Hey lady, go get your husband." Like, why are you doing that? Or when he told the Pharisees, "You are whitewashed tombs." Or he says, "Why do you call me good and you do not do the things that I say?" You see, Jesus didn't just stay quiet and say, you're a nice Pharisee. He says, no, you're whitewashed tombs. You're full of dead bones. You see, Jesus wasn't afraid to stir things up because he wanted their salvation. Even St. Paul, he went after St. Peter. St. Peter was eating with the Gentiles one day, people that the Jews would never deal with. And one day, as soon as the Jews come, St. Peter leaves them. He avoids the Gentiles because those are bad guys. And he sits with the Jews. And St. Paul calls him out to his face. And he says, "What are you doing?" And they get in this big argument. St. Paul had no problem telling St. Peter, "What you're doing is wrong." You're being fake. It's artificial. And St. Peter was woken up in that moment. You see, Nathan was willing to be a truth teller, to the point where David confessed and says, I am the man. My question to you is, what if David never had a Nathan in his life? What would have happened to David the king? If David never had somebody tell him, what you're doing is wrong, there would have been a number 2 Bathsheba, and a number 3 Bathsheba, and a number 4 Bathsheba. There would have been endless destruction in his life. But because he had a Nathan, we still have this great figure called David the king, the man after God's own heart. Make sure that you invite somebody to tell you the truth. Last thing, without someone to hold you accountable, your life might end tragically. You might end up completely lost in life. Go find somebody that you know loves you. Not somebody that just wants to stick it to you, but somebody that you know that's going to tell you because they love you. I need to tell you something, whether you like it or not. You know that I'm faithful to you. You know that I'm loyal to you. You need to hear this. I would rather risk losing your friendship than you losing your soul. Once again, I would rather risk losing your friendship because I'm saving you than you losing your soul. May God grant us to be truth tellers, to avoid being superficial, and doing the things that are not authentic. People who love authentic relationships always prefer the pain of temporary turmoil to the peace of long-lasting superficiality. Once again, people who love authentic and real relationships always prefer the pain of temporary turmoil to the peace of long-lasting superficiality. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Let's stand up.